If tales of unfaithful husbands and hidden truths pull you in, you're exactly where you need to be. Like this video and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to stay for what's next. My name is Claire Donovan. I'm 38 years old, a corporate attorney in Chicago, and I know how to read a room. That skill saved my career more than once. It also, eventually, saved my life, or at least the life I was entitled to rebuild after 11 years of marriage to a man named Daniel. I want to be clear about something before I tell you this story. I'm not telling it because I'm bitter. I'm telling it because I spent 11 years making myself smaller, quieter, more accommodating, and I think other women need to hear what that costs and what reclaiming it looks like. Daniel and I met in our late 20s at a mutual friend's dinner party in Wicker Park. He was charming without being obvious about it, the kind of man who listens when you speak and remembers the details later. He was in sales. I was 2 years into my associate position at a corporate firm downtown. We were both ambitious, both tired, both looking for something that felt like home. We built one together, a brownstone in Lincoln Park, refinished hardwood floors, a kitchen we renovated ourselves over one chaotic summer. He coached youth soccer on weekend mornings. I organized the finances, the calendars, the logistics of a life that looked from the outside like something worth envying. Twice during our marriage, I withdrew from career opportunities because Daniel's trajectory required relocation. Denver first, then back to Chicago. I told myself these were joint decisions. Looking back, I made the decisions. He simply didn't object, which is a different thing entirely. We didn't have children. That too became a quiet compromise neither of us addressed directly after year 7. The subject just stopped coming up. Like furniture we'd agreed without discussion to stop moving. I noticed the first sign in October. Not dramatic. Nothing ever is at first. Daniel started showering before dinner instead of after. His phone stayed face down on the counter. He worked late on Tuesday and Thursday nights with a consistency that didn't match his actual quarter-end schedule. I knew that schedule. I had managed it for years. I didn't say anything. I'm an attorney. I know better than to reveal what I know before I know enough. I started paying attention instead. Carefully, methodically, without urgency. The way I approach everything that matters. Within 2 weeks, I had a name. Rebecca Hale, 29, recently divorced, new to Daniel's regional team. I had met her once at a company dinner. She laughed too easily at everything he said and touched his forearm when she spoke to him. I had noticed it and filed it away without examining it. I examined it now. I opened a separate bank account at a different institution that same week. Then I called my colleague Margaret Chen, the finest divorce attorney in Cook County, and asked her to lunch. I didn't cry once. Not yet. Margaret listened to everything without interrupting. When I finished, she set down her fork and looked at me with the focused calm of someone shifting into professional mode. "How certain are you?" she asked. "Certain enough to be sitting here." She nodded. "Then here's what we do." What followed was the most important education of my adult life, more useful than law school, more clarifying than anything 11 years of marriage had taught me. Margaret walked me through Illinois equitable distribution law, what contribution meant legally, what documentation I needed, and most critically, what I should not do yet. Don't confront him. Don't move money in ways that look retaliatory. Don't change behavior patterns that might alert him. Document everything and protect your position first. I followed every instruction precisely. I hired Paul Reyes, a forensic accountant with 20 years of experience, and a manner so quiet you could forget he was in the room. Within 3 weeks, Paul identified a credit card Daniel had opened 18 months earlier without my knowledge. The charges were specific and damning. Restaurants I had never been to, a hotel in River North used 4 times, 2 weekend stays at a boutique inn in Harbor Country, Michigan. I printed the statements and locked them in my office filing cabinet at work. At home, I changed nothing. I made dinner twice a week. I asked about his day. I laughed when it was appropriate. I slept beside him without flinching. That performance was the hardest thing I have ever done professionally or personally, and I have cross-examined hostile witnesses for 6 hours without breaking composure. What kept me steady was the folder growing in my office cabinet. Every receipt, every conference registration overlap I found online. Dallas, Atlanta, Minneapolis, all the same events, both their names in the public attendee lists. Paul's preliminary report, the growing picture of a man who believed his carelessness was invisible. Daniel, meanwhile, grew more confident. He stopped being careful the way people do when they've been undiscovered long enough to mistake luck for safety. He left his personal email open on the shared laptop one evening while he showered. I didn't touch it. I photographed the screen from across the room and forwarded it to Margaret. Then I closed the laptop, poured myself a glass of water, and watched the news until he came back downstairs. By November, I had everything I needed to proceed. But I waited, because Margaret had told me to wait for something specific. Behavior in a witnessed social setting. Something that would establish a documented pattern rather than isolated incidents. Daniel gave me exactly that. He always did underestimate how carefully I listened. Frank Calloway, Daniel's regional director, hosted a dinner at his home in Evanston in late November. These events were important to Daniel. Visibility, hierarchy, the performance of professional success. He always wanted me present. The accomplished wife completed an image he needed to project. I wore a navy dress. I was warm and composed, and said exactly the right things to exactly the right people. Rebecca Hale was there. I had known she would be. I'd seen the guest list on Daniel's phone when he left it unlocked on the kitchen counter. I photographed it without touching it, forwarded it to Margaret, and said nothing. She arrived 20 minutes after us. Black dress, unhurried confidence, the easy familiarity of someone who had been in this social circle longer than her tenure suggested she should be. She moved through the room and eventually reached Daniel with the naturalness of a path she'd traveled before. He introduced us. Claire, you remember Rebecca? She's had a remarkable year. Rebecca shook my hand and held eye contact with the particular steadiness of a woman who had decided not to be intimidated. Daniel mentions you often, she said. I'm sure he does, I said pleasantly. We both understood the situation completely. Neither of us acknowledged it. Later, I stepped outside for air. Through the glass, I watched them standing close together near the fireplace. Not touching, not doing anything a photograph could condemn. But the body language was its own document. The angle of his shoulders toward her, the way she tilted her head when he spoke, the private register of their conversation in a room full of people. I stood in the cold and felt nothing dramatic, just clarity, the particular, sharp-edged clarity of a decision already made. Inside, I found Frank's wife, Carol, and spent 20 minutes discussing her daughter's graduate program in environmental law. I was genuinely engaged. Carol later told mutual friends I was one of the most present conversationalists she'd ever met. On the drive home, Daniel told me Frank had said I was impressive. You always do well at these things, he said. Thank you, I said. I watched the city pass outside my window and thought about the folder in my office cabinet. Frank Calloway turned 60 in December. Smaller gathering, closer circle. Daniel had too much whiskey. Not visibly drunk, never that, but loosened in the particular way that removes the filter between what a man thinks and what he says. I had positioned myself near the hallway when I heard his voice shift register. He was speaking to two colleagues near the fireplace. I stood behind the partial wall and listened without moving. I'll be honest, Daniel said, quietly but clearly. I haven't felt like myself in years. You get into these routines and you just go through the motions. Rebecca actually sees me. She gets what I'm building, what I'm capable of. One colleague said something low I couldn't catch. Claire is capable, Daniel continued. She's always been capable, but that's not the same thing. It stopped being the same thing a long time ago. With Rebecca, it's different. She chose me, not the life, not the stability. Me. Someone laughed softly. Agreement of some kind. I know how it sounds, Daniel said, but I haven't felt this alive in years. I stood very still and let him finish. Then I walked back into the room, accepted sparkling water from a passing server, and rejoined Carol's conversation about holiday travel plans. I stayed another 40 minutes. I was gracious leaving. I thanked Frank warmly. In the car, Daniel talked about the evening. Who'd said what? The news about a colleague's promotion. I responded at appropriate intervals. At home, I went straight to the guest room. I lay in the dark and thought about one word: capable. 11 years of sacrifice, 2 career retreats, a decade of managed logistics and quiet support, reduced, in a warm room with whiskey, to capable. I picked up my phone and texted Margaret. I'm ready. Let's move. I filed for divorce on a Tuesday in January. Gray, cold, unremarkable morning. Daniel was at work. Margaret had everything prepared: the petition, the documentation, Paul Reyes's signed affidavit. We cited irreconcilable differences in the petition itself, clean language. But the supporting file was a different matter. Credit card records, hotel receipts, conference registration overlaps spanning 14 months, the undisclosed account, and a precise financial analysis of my career interruptions and their documented cost. He was served at his office at 2:14 in the afternoon. He called 7 times between 2:30 and 4. I let every call go to voicemail and listened to the messages in sequence that evening. They moved in a predictable arc: confusion, then controlled concern, then something close to panic wearing the mask of reason. The 7th message said, "Claire, whatever you think is happening, you're wrong. We don't need lawyers. Please just call me." I saved all 7 to a folder. Then I drove home. He was at the kitchen table with his jacket still on, looking like a man who'd rehearsed something and forgotten every word the moment I walked through the door. "When did you know?" he asked. "October," I said. I set my bag down and filled a glass of water. "That long," he exhaled. "And you just planned all of this?" "I prepared," I said. "There's a difference." He looked at me with full, unfiltered attention, the kind I hadn't received in years. "Claire, I don't want to lose you." I looked at him steadily. At the kitchen we'd renovated together. At the man who had described me as capable to colleagues while standing beside the woman he'd been meeting in hotel rooms for over a year. "You made that decision," I said. "I'm just the one filing the paperwork." I took my water upstairs and closed the door. We lived in the same house for 3 weeks after I filed. Margaret had advised it. Leaving voluntarily could complicate my position with the property. So we maintained a cold, functional routine. Coffee in the morning, careful hallway navigation, the polished surface of a life with nothing left underneath it. Daniel tried to talk 4 times in those 3 weeks. He wanted to explain, to contextualize, to walk me through his emotional timeline as though understanding his journey was something I owed him. The second time he tried, he said something that stopped me. "I never meant for you to find out this way. I was going to tell you. I just needed more time to figure out what I actually wanted." I looked at him for a moment. "And have you?" I asked. "Figured out what you want?" He didn't answer. That pause was its own answer. In February, the Regional Industry Awards dinner was held at the Langham Hotel downtown. It had been on our shared calendar for months, originally marked as an event we'd attend together. After I filed, Daniel assumed I wouldn't go. He was wrong. I had a legitimate reason to be there. 2 of my firm's corporate clients were being recognized that evening, and my senior partner had asked me to represent the firm at their table. I told no one I was attending. I simply went. I arrived before Daniel. I was seated at a table near the center of the room, with a clear sightline to the entrance. He walked in at 7:22. Rebecca was beside him, not behind him, not at a distance that allowed for ambiguity. Beside him, with the easy, unhurried placement of a woman who had stopped pretending. He didn't see me immediately. He moved through the room with the confidence of someone who believed the evening belonged to him. He stopped at Frank Calloway's table, said something that made the group laugh, and then, with the deliberate ease of a man making a statement, he placed his hand on Rebecca's back and said something to Frank that made Frank glance across the room with an expression I recognized immediately. Frank had seen me. Daniel followed Frank's gaze. Our eyes met across the room. The distance was perhaps 30 feet. He went completely still, the particular stillness of a man watching something irreversible happen in real time. I held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then I turned back to my colleague mid-sentence and continued the conversation as though nothing had occurred. I stayed 2 hours. I was composed and engaged and professionally present. When I left, I shook hands with my clients, thanked my senior partner, and walked out through the lobby without looking back. In the car, I sat for a moment before starting the engine. Then I called Margaret. He introduced her publicly. I said, "Frank Calloway witnessed it." I was in the room. A brief silence. "You were there?" "Professional obligation," I said. "Legitimate and documented." "Claire." I could hear the careful precision in her voice. "That changes our position considerably. A witnessed public declaration during legal marriage, with you present, that's exactly what we needed." "I know," I said. I started the engine and drove home through the February dark, and for the first time in months, I felt something that wasn't grief or anger or the cold discipline of preparation. It felt like the moment a case turns. Daniel retained an attorney named Griffin. Aggressive, corner office, reputation for scorched earth tactics. Our first joint session lasted 2 hours. Griffin's opening position argued that my career interruptions were personal choices made independently of the marriage, that Daniel's future earning potential should be weighted heavily, that the asset split should reflect his ongoing professional trajectory. It was a competent argument. Margaret had anticipated every word of it. She presented our documentation without drama. The relocation correspondence, emails from Daniel requesting the moves, my responses, the resulting career adjustments all dated and sourced. The letter from my former firm confirming I had withdrawn from partnership consideration in 2017. 11 years of tax returns showing the income differential. Paul Reyes's calculation of my projected earnings absent those 2 interruptions. The final figure was significant. Griffin's expression didn't change. Daniel's did. He sat across the table looking at a spreadsheet that translated our marriage into columns and figures, and I watched something move across his face. Not guilt, precisely. The specific discomfort of a man realizing the story he'd been telling himself had a parallel version, documented and sitting across the table from him. Then Margaret placed one additional item on the table, a single page. It was a legal summary of the February dinner, the witnessed public declaration, my presence in the room, professionally documented, the reclassification of the undisclosed credit card expenditures, the hotels, the restaurants, the weekends in Michigan, as dissipation of marital assets sustained during legal marriage. Griffin read it carefully, then he set it down. "We need to recess," he said. In the hallway, Margaret touched my arm briefly. He wasn't prepared for the Langham documentation. "He forgot I was in the room," I said. She almost smiled. "They always do." We reconvened an hour later. Griffin's tone had changed, not defeated, but recalibrated. Over the following 3 weeks, we exchanged 7 rounds of counteroffers, each one moving closer to what the documentation supported. What Daniel never understood, what Griffin couldn't undo, was that the moment he introduced Rebecca at the Langham with me 30 feet away, he had handed me the clearest possible evidence of his own timeline. He had made his declaration publicly. Now he was living with what that cost. By the end of the 3rd week, Griffin stopped contesting the career interruption calculations entirely. The number was no longer negotiable, and Daniel knew it. The settlement terms became clear to Daniel in early March, and with them came the understanding of what the public photograph had cost him specifically. Because the photo established the relationship as ongoing and witnessed during our legal marriage, not after separation, it affected how the court would view asset dissipation. The undisclosed credit card, the hotel stays, the weekend trips, those expenditures were now classifiable as marital funds used to sustain an extramarital relationship. That shifted the calculation further in my favor. Griffin had not prepared Daniel for this possibility. I know this because Daniel called me directly, not through attorneys, which itself was a violation of the process Margaret immediately flagged. And for the first time since January, his voice carried something unguarded and raw. "You knew," he said. "From the beginning of all of this, you knew exactly what you were building." "I prepared," I said. "I told you that in January. This isn't preparation, Claire. This is—" He stopped. "It's documentation," I said, "of choices you made. I simply kept records. Silence. "Did you ever consider," he said finally, "just talking to me?" I thought about October, the phone face down on the counter, the changed shower schedule, 14 months of careful deception. I thought about a warm room in Evanston, and the word capable delivered to colleagues like a verdict. "You had 11 years of conversations with me," I said. "You chose different ones." I ended the call and notified Margaret immediately. That same week, 2 of Daniel's major brand endorsements quietly declined renewal. I didn't orchestrate this. I want to be clear about that. But when a man's marital situation becomes publicly documented in professional circles, and when that documentation includes a photograph at an industry event where sponsors and clients were present, consequences follow their own logic. Rebecca, I was told through a mutual contact, had requested a permanent transfer to the Dallas office. The relationship, apparently, had not survived the transition from secret to public. These things often don't. They're built for shadow, and direct light changes their structure entirely. We signed in March, a Thursday afternoon in Margaret's conference room, gray light through tall windows, the particular quiet of a process reaching its conclusion. I received the Lincoln Park brownstone, which I intended to sell, a settlement figure that reflected 11 years of documented contribution. Full restoration of my retirement accounts to pre-marriage baseline adjusted for the years I had reduced contributions to support household expenses during Daniel's relocations. Legal fees covered. Daniel retained his 401k, his vehicle, and a reduced cash settlement that reflected the credit card expenditure findings. He also retained a professional reputation that had shifted, not destroyed. Daniel was competent, and professional communities have short memories for these things, but permanently altered among the people who had been at that industry dinner, who had received that photograph, who had watched him introduce Rebecca as his partner in a room full of colleagues who had attended our wedding. The story existed. Stories in professional circles have long memories, even when people pretend otherwise. Margaret and I sat in her conference room after the attorneys left. She opened sparkling water and we sat quietly for a moment. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Tired," I said. "And clear." She nodded. "That's exactly right." I meant both things completely. There was no triumph in the room, no satisfaction of the dramatic kind, just the particular stillness that follows sustained effort. The feeling of setting down something heavy you carried so long you forgot you were carrying it. I sold the brownstone in April, took an apartment in the West Loop, smaller, entirely mine, no history embedded in its walls. I chose every object in it deliberately. There was something quietly profound about that, a space that reflected only current choices, not accumulated compromises. I accepted the partnership my firm had offered twice before, the one I had declined both times, for reasons that no longer existed. I'm not going to tell you I emerged undamaged. That would be dishonest. And dishonesty, even the self-protective kind, compounds over time into something structural, into a life built on managed surfaces rather than solid ground. What I will tell you is what I learned. I spent 11 years being capable, present, competent, self-erasing in the small ways that accumulate without announcement into something significant. I managed the logistics of a shared life, while Daniel managed his ambitions. I withdrew from opportunities, so his opportunities could expand. I made myself quieter and more accommodating, and told myself this was partnership. It wasn't. Partnership requires reciprocity. What I had was a performance of stability that served one person's trajectory more than the other's. And I had been too invested in the appearance of the life to examine its actual architecture until it was too late to repair it. The anger came later than I expected. Not during the process, when I needed to be precise and controlled, but after, quietly, in the evenings in my new apartment, in the specific way that grief arrives when the practical emergency is over. I let it come. I didn't manage it, or document it, or present it to anyone. I just felt it, and waited, and eventually it changed shape into something more useful. Daniel and Rebecca were seen together occasionally through the fall. People mentioned it to me with careful expressions, watching for reaction. I never gave them one. By November, I had built something I recognized as genuinely mine, a practice, a partnership track, an apartment that felt like a considered choice rather than a remaining option, a life I had selected deliberately rather than inherited through accommodation. One evening, I sat at my office desk. After everyone had gone home and looked at the city through the window, I had specifically chosen this office for when I accepted the partnership. I thought about the woman who had opened a bank account quietly, called an attorney, said nothing, held everything, and moved with precision through the longest year of her life. She had been capable. More than that, she had been paying attention to everything he thought she'd missed. And in the end, that was exactly enough. Thanks for being here until the very last word. Your support drives everything we create. Drop a like, subscribe, and prepare yourself for the next revelation.